When we gather as a body of believers and lift up our voices in praise, that's one aspect of our worship, but it's not the whole of our worship. Our worship is meaningful only when it stems from genuine faith in God. Worship is our declaration of submission. It's a reflection of our understanding that our lives are fulfilling their greatest purpose when we are glorifying God. Worship is about the heart. It's about prizing God above everything else and honoring Him as the one of highest importance, and then spending our lives acting accordingly. You've heard it said, and I absolutely believe, that worship is so much more than singing a few songs during a church service. It's a life devoted to bringing Him glory by knowing Jesus and making Him known. When we gather as a body of believers and lift up our voices in praise, that's one aspect of our worship, but it's not the whole of our worship. For the purposes of this video, when I use the term worship, I am going to be referring to our musical worship during our times gathered for a church service. If you were to ask 14 different worship leaders what worship is, you probably get 14 different answers, and we will eventually get more into that discussion on this channel, but for now I want to focus on worship that God rejects. These aren't ideas that I pulled out of thin air, but I want to look at 3 biblical accounts of God not accepting the worship offered to Him, and what those stories mean for us today. Let's start with the story of Cain and Abel. In Genesis chapter 4, verse 1 through 7, we see Cain and Abel offering sacrifices to God in 2 radically different responses from God. God accepted Abel's offering, but He rejected Cain's. And while the exact reason isn't explicitly stated in Genesis, the book of Hebrews does shed a little more light on this, and it tells us that Abel's offering was accepted because of faith. Abel's faith went beyond just the physical act of the offering. It was a reflection of his heart's devotion and confidence in God. In contrast, Cain's offering lacked that same level of faith and sincerity, which is why it was not accepted. Abel's example teaches us that our actions, our worship, is meaningful only when it stems from genuine faith in God. Worship isn't just about going through the motions. Moving on, we encounter the story of Samuel and Saul in the first book of Samuel in chapter 10. Saul received specific instructions from the prophet Samuel about a sacrifice, but chapter 13 then tells us Saul decided to do things his own way. Saul's actions, even though he offered a sacrifice and worship, reveal a crucial aspect. God is pleased with our obedience. Worship isn't about following our own preferences and doing what we want and what we think is acceptable. It's about humbly submitting to God's will and guidance. Worship that aligns with God's terms rather than our own is the kind of worship that truly honors Him. In the book of Malachi, we see God's rebuke of insincere worship by the Israelites. They were offering blind and blemished animals, showing a lack of genuine devotion. In other words, they were coming to God with an attitude of, "This will be good enough. What I'm offering is way better than what they're offering." God's displeasure serves as a reminder that worship isn't just about outward actions, it's about the attitude of the heart. Too often we operate in a way that seems like, as busy as we are, God should be happy that I've sacrificed my time and I've set it aside for Him on a Sunday morning. What we see in the book of Malachi teaches us that worship isn't a mere ritual. It's a reflection of our heart's posture, and true worship comes from a heart full of reverence and love for God. Worship offered with the wrong attitude falls short of the worship that He desires. So, what can we learn from these stories as leaders? Well, true worship goes beyond rituals and ceremonies. So we must do everything we can to avoid leading in a way that seems like we are simply going through the motions. What are you doing to make sure your heart isn't worshiping without faith? Are there things you need to give up or stop doing so you aren't worshiping God on your terms, but according to His desires? Have you been approaching your role in leading with an attitude of, "Oh well, this is good enough for this week, it'll have to do"? Authentic worship acknowledges God's greatness and seeks to honor Him for who He is and what He has done. It's not confined to specific moments, but it permeates every aspect of our lives, even the planning. Worship is our declaration of submission. It's a reflection of our understanding that our lives are fulfilling their greatest purpose when we are glorifying God. I hope these stories offer a better understanding of true worship. May we have the wisdom to know what to do, the faith to follow, and the passion to pursue. God bless.